Hi, Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec here. Wanted to chat a little bit about a breach that was announced yesterday from a company called TimeHop. Now, I'm going to be the first to tell you that TimeHop is not a service that I'm familiar with or was familiar with. I am now, but was not originally. Apparently, for those that don't know, TimeHop allows you to basically go in and see what was happening in your social media feed like a year ago or whatever the case is, basically allowing you to kind of turn back the clock with your social media posts and interactions. It's kind of interesting. This is one of these services that I have to be honest, I'm kind of surprised exists, but hey, obviously, not everybody shares that opinion because 21 million users had their information compromised. Now, look, every week there's a brand new breach, and every week, heck, every day it seems like there's a brand new breach, and one of the questions always comes down to, hey, what should we do? And then separately, maybe another one is the why is this one worth talking about when we have so many other breaches occurring? And so I'd like to kind of dive into that a little bit here. The reason that I care about this one specifically has to do with the integration with other platforms, right? So the breach itself, the fact that somebody saw your social media data, look, in most cases, your social media timelines were public anyway. Don't get me wrong, I understand there's a very small number of users, or probably relatively small intersection between users that have very private social media feeds, as well as users that use this time hop functionality. That said, I'm sure that there is some overlap there, potentially of people that may have had some of that data exposed. Now, TimeHop says that once they detected the breach, they logged everybody out of the apps. They went ahead and disabled any API keys, etc. Right. So let's actually talk about talk a little bit about the deactivation of these API keys. Now, TimeHop did the right thing here, in that any API keys that they had basically identified, that could have been accessed, they immediately basically disconnected or deauthorized those API keys. This is actually kind of important because what we're looking at here is not a single platform breach, and I think that this is one of these things you're going to have to think a lot more about in the future as we see tighter integration between different providers. Right. Again, in this case, remember the TimeHop doesn't have any direct user base itself, or maybe any direct content base itself is maybe a better way to say that. In this case here, TimeHop is leveraging the data created on other platforms, right? Whether that's it doesn't really matter, these other social media platforms. The bottom line is here, when you link your social media accounts to those platforms, and you're probably familiar with this, if you've ever linked your Twitter account to anything, for instance, again, you'll see the little whole, do I authorize the Twitter account, or do I authorize this third-party provider to take these actions, whatever those actions happen to be, whether it's read messages, post messages, etc., on my timeline, right? So we see this frequently, whether it's on Twitter, on Facebook, even on LinkedIn. I, for instance, use Hootsuite a lot. For instance, when I record these videos, I tend to go ahead and broadcast that off of Hootsuite because I can type one message and send it to 3 different platforms simultaneously, right? I'm lazy when it comes to this kind of stuff. I do understand, of course, that there's a risk. Obviously, I've given API usage to Hootsuite to be able to manage 3 of my social media accounts, right? As I'm saying this, as I'm verbalizing this, I'm thinking, wow, not only do they have read access, they have post access as well. Now, an attacker, let's say, that took over Hootsuite and took over the ability to post to those timelines, obviously this would be interesting and concerning. I say interesting from the standpoint of it's a breach. How is it not interesting? But from the concerning standpoint, obviously there are some of us who have higher profile social media presences, and that could cause reputational damage to the companies that we work for or associated with. For instance, I know for a fact that SANS monitors my Twitter account, for those type of reputational issues, right? And look, it's not just SANS. Obviously, anybody that you're working for, I fully expect is monitoring your social media feeds, as they should be, right? Very often in red team assessments, we find confidential information being broadcast on these social media feeds. And before you say something like, "Oh my gosh, well that's everybody else," I would never do that, right? Clearly, there's nothing to worry about with me. Your employer doesn't know that, right? And so of course they're going to watch these feeds. That said, imagine here that you're in a position where again, you've got this API key compromise. again, that can post to an account, right? So again, they could be from an attacker that compromises, let's say, TimeHop. If those API keys have posting permissions, there's no reason to believe here that they didn't, or sorry, that they did. As a matter of fact, at this point, I think that TimeHop's API keys were only used for read. Again, as I mentioned before, I wasn't really familiar with the service, but I will note again, my interest in this isn't so much TimeHop. It's kind of talking about the understanding that a lot of these breaches, not only today but likely in the future, are not going to be standalone events, right? We're going to see multiple different platforms involved, and again, that's what you're seeing here, right? It's not just TimeHop. It's TimeHop plus everything else that's linked into TimeHop, right? That said, a couple of closing thoughts here, right? Obviously, monitor your accounts for any signs of malicious activity. If you see somebody posting on an account, right, that's not you, go into the provider. Let's say they post on your Twitter account. Go into your Twitter account and look at authorized applications. As a matter of fact, make this a calendar reminder. I do this every 30 to 60 days. Every time I do this, and I'm pretty stingy with what I give permissions to specifically on my Twitter account. Every time I review my Twitter account, I find something else that managed to weasel its way in there. That I was kind of like, do I really remember doing this? And most of the time I can track it back to, yeah, I remember doing that. Okay, I checked the little box and yep, okay, good to go. That said, again, you want to be very, very careful about what you're allowing to, particularly the read-write permissions, where it's actually posting to your account. Lest you think that I'm crazy here with a little reputational damage, think about good old Ted Cruz, right? You may remember last year that Ted Cruz retweeted some illicit content from his account. Of course, the first claim was my account was hacked. I don't know that anybody really believes that at this point, but I do want to highlight the fact that, again, in one of these scenarios, that absolutely could be the case, right? There's likely a time between when the attacker gains access to the system and the provider, such as TimeHop, Hootsuite, whoever it is that you happen to have your API keys shared with, notices the breach and basically deauthorizes those API keys. In that interim time period, of course, an attacker could actually post content to your account, right? From a forensic standpoint, I want you to think about remember, and we do this all the time in forensics, where we have to remind people, just because the user account did it doesn't mean the person did it, right? We have a common phrase in forensics called SOGDI, some other guy or gal did it, SOGDI. It's very, very common, so much so, again, that claim that it wasn't me, the malware on my machine did it, is so common, again, that it has an acronym among forensic investigators. It also, appears in a topic that's very common to us called the Trojan defense, right? It wasn't me, it was the Trojan on my machine that did that particular activity, whatever that activity is, right? So coming back around here, kind of closing out. Again, look for these interconnected breaches. Expect these interconnected breaches from a particularly from a security operations side. Most major brands today have a social media presence. Bear in mind, where do you have those, basically where are you using those keys, who has authorization to use those accounts, right? On the authorization to use the account side, don't forget about the EPA faux pas. A couple of, I guess it was about 2 years ago now, the Environmental Protection Agency legitimate government account tweeted about a Kardashian game that was being played. Apparently the root cause of that was a user, basically an authorized user of the EPA account had shared her iPad basically had shared the iPad that they use for the Twitter account with a child that was in their care. The child downloaded or went on Facebook, whatever, got on this Kardashian game, which then tweeted out on their behalf, that they were really enjoying, who knows what was going on a Kardashian game, because, anyway, not my thing. But coming back around on that, again, we want to make sure that we understand who has authorization to use these accounts, who does not, and again, put some, be ready to lock that down, be ready to revoke API keys, right? This is not something that's just that we want to rely on TimeHop to do. And by the way, I want to give TimeHop a big fist bump here, because TimeHop did an awesome job of saying, hey, look, proactively, we don't think that the attackers were doing anything with these keys. We don't know that they were compromised, but look, we're going to deauthenticate basically disable all of these keys, deauthorize these keys anyway, because we want to make sure out of an abundance of caution that nothing gets done with those keys illicitly. And again, bravo to them, great job on the response. Internally, we want to make sure that we've inventoried at an enterprise level what are those social media assets. And again, this goes a little bit beyond social media. Of course, I'm talking about that here because it's TimeHop, but honestly, it's anything that you have API keys for. And so I guess I'll close out there and just say, again, watch out for the breaches. Take a look and inventory, what social media assets you have, both privately as well as for your enterprises. And then finally, with those, take some time to basically take some time to identify who's in control of those accounts. Who can deauthorize those keys in the event of a breach or out of the abundance of caution. And again, what third-party apps, right? Make sure to regularly check what third-party apps have access to those accounts. Anyway, enough about this. I'm going to go ahead and kick out here. Jake Williams from Edition InfoSec signing off.